Hello and welcome to Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that your problematic uncle will hate. I've updated the qualifier on the word uncle because some of y'all's uncles, based on messages and comments, are you and you don't hate it. But I know for a fact that one of my estranged uncles would, because I stalk him on fascist Twitter. And when confronted with the fact that last summer the Israeli occupation force had dropped more new net explosive weight than a nuclear bomb on Gaza, he replied, "They'll get over it. The Japanese did." Since the unfortunately named global war on terror, we have to keep in mind that many Americans feel this type of cruel apathy towards people of the global South. And also what happens when you're a near senior conservative boomer who has watched too many World War II documentaries on the History Channel. But today we are talking about Gaza, specifically healthcare and medical extraction within conflict zones, and what the historical precedents that were set, the state policy of targeting hospitals and medical staff means for conflict medicine going forward. What does it mean for conflict medicine going forward? Excuse me. And keep in mind the current incarnations of international law, for instance, the Geneva Convention and the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross Law of Land Warfare, were created in post-World War II Europe so that none of those things would happen again, at least not to a white European. Something you can remind your MAGA or hawkish liberal uncles who have never actually witnessed war firsthand about. If they ever do, they'll probably just ball up in a corner praying for the U.S. embassy to extract them, which they won't. So the Gaza ceasefire stands on the edge of a knife, which we'll get into, but this political and military reality brings back into sharp focus, though it's never really gone away, the humanitarian situation in Gaza currently, and in the wake of the Israeli state policy of systematically dismantling the healthcare situation, and the U.S. use of weaponry and the clumsily orchestrated direct action raids by IDF on hospitals and hospital staff in the name of finding Hamas. So to that end, we are joined by Dr. Mimi Syed, a board-certified emergency medicine physician. She is an assistant clinical professor at the University of Washington and Washington State University. She's a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians. So she served in Gaza from August 8th to September 5th, 2024, and December 3rd to December 31st, 2024, at both al-Aqsa Hospital and Nasser Hospital. Thank you so much for being here. I know you're doing a media push right now, and I appreciate you coming on to this platform to do so.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just jump right on in there. I think you're pressed for time. So before we get into the specifics of medical extraction, issues surrounding the right of return, and the potential breakdown of the ceasefire, I was hoping you could describe, in general terms, your experience during your 2 tours in Gaza, both in the summer and in the winter of last year. Yeah, in general terms, what you think the audience should know and understand about what's going on in Gaza currently and what has been going on.
So in August, it was pretty terrible when I entered. I was completely shocked at what we saw, what we encountered when we entered. It was very apocalyptic. Everything was destroyed. The basic things that we needed to save lives, we didn't have. We didn't have things like running water, gauze, medications, certain antibiotics. We just didn't have anything. Even gloves were lacking. I bought a pair, by myself, for myself, and I was able to use it. But the was terrible, and I was watching it and following it pretty closely. But even knowing all those things, entering, it was a complete shock. And when I went back in December, the situation had gotten significantly worse, and I didn't think that that was possible. But we were starting to see more of the aftermath of all of these injuries, people not having good healing in some of the surgeries that they had, or having recurrent infections because of the situation, the sanitation. There is no sanitation, there's sewage everywhere. So those type of things is what we were seeing and what we were encountering.
Right. And so I suppose, one of the more notorious things that was actually making the news in the media, not of course they were downplaying the actual footage and the stories about children being sniped, burns. Could you talk more about your experiences with those? I would say allegations, but they're not allegations. They're obviously were happening.
We all witnessed them. A group of U.S. doctors were polled for the New York Times opinion piece by one of my colleagues, and all of us had all of us had seen children arrive with bullets in their head, in their chest, and various parts of their body, dead a lot of times, or even if they came in, they were critically injured, close to dying. I saw about 18 children in my time there that I had just documented in some form that came in with bullets that were sniped while they were playing in front of their house, while they were, in their tent eating breakfast, various things. But these are all small children under 12 years old that you can't really mistake them for adults. We saw that regularly. We saw it all the time. I was there 2 different times at 2 different hospitals, and I saw it all the time. And people there see it all the time. In the U.S., if we saw a child arrive with a bullet in their head, the law enforcement agency would be like completely taking over the hospital and figuring out why this happened, who did it. In Gaza, it's a normal occurrence because they're so used to it. And you can say that, oh, that was crossfire, this was crossfire, but when it's directly in the head and in the chest, over and over every single day, logic kind of defies that to say that that's just crossfire or just coincidence.
Right. And, just from my own experience fighting an illegal war, usually when it's crossfire, there's multiple hits in random locations. Some of them are ricochets to have like really precise headshots and, just torso shots as well is very indicative that a sniper or long range marksman was looking through a scope and intentionally choosing to shoot a child. What other like trauma injuries were most encountered?
We, like I said, we saw a lot of children were coming in with shrapnel injuries. And there's
Mhm.
a specific shrapnel that we saw all the time, very small cube shaped shrapnel that causes a lot of injury internally. I think it's made out of tungsten. It's cube shaped, uniform. And usually we would find them in parts of the body of children, and they were disproportionately affected by this because their bodies are so small. So if a small cube entered an artery, for example, in a child, it would kill them. If it entered their liver, you didn't have controllable bleeding. And so children would succumb to these just one cube and die because they cavitate inside. There usually we would have these type of injuries come in when there was times of congregation. So it would be times where families are together in the evening in their tents, in their homes, when they're, maybe under shade or during evacuation periods when they're together. So you can cause more damage. And so a lot of patients would come in at the same time. When I was there this last time, I was able to actually get one, and it was found it under the eyelid of an elderly man. But we would find these all the time, and we would see them on imaging. We'd see them on like X-rays or CT scans almost all the time. It was so common.
And uniform shape, kind of like I don't know, we like a ball bearing or something, because like shrapnel generally is not uniform at all. It's just like twisted metal in various sizes.
Yep, exactly, and that's what I understood. I'm not a by any means. I have no military training, but what I understood shrapnel to be were like various, irregular shapes of metal, essentially. But these were all normally shaped, very, very tiny.
Yeah, and just so for the audience, shrapnel is usually the casing of the explosion itself. Then on certain things, like I don't know if you watch Vietnam War movies, like there's things called like claymore mines that have the explosive, and then in front of the explosive that shoots out are a bunch of tiny ball bearings. So that's kind of more, I think, like what you see in terms of these type of injuries, because they're not like blast injuries. They're not coming from a bunker buster bomb necessarily. Like these are generally anti personnel what we'd call anti-infantry weapons, explosive weapons, because they have the ball bearings. Of course, there is no infantry in the area. These are all civilians, children, and elderly men. So I actually hadn't heard that testimony before yet. That's even more disturbing than just dropping a 2,000-pound bomb, because usually it's just like, we're going to drop this house, but we don't really care who's inside. But now it's no, like, generally now they're in camps. We're going to drop this small anti personnel ordinance, and that's where you're seeing that. And then burns. What about overpressure injuries?
You mean like explosive?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we would see traumatic amputations. We would see, a ton of head trauma. We had so much head trauma, like brain injuries coming in. And that was very common. And that was all the time. We would see that. Shrapnel is extremely common. And the other type of, I guess, the more layman terms, shrapnel, that's what we saw a lot of that as well. But yeah, it was, I mean, a regular occurrence. But also we were seeing, besides just munition, we were seeing now things that you don't typically see. Like this was a population, just prior to October 7th, this is a population that had cars, like normal lives, like you and I have. We have cars, we have careers, we have education. There were roads, and those roads have been destroyed. The cars have been destroyed. No new cars or automobiles are allowed in. So we saw a lot of like horse carts and donkey carts. That's like the general mode of transportation there. And we would see so many injuries, especially in small children, as a result of these donkey carts. Because if you can imagine it, it's just like a slate of wood on top of this donkey's, back, kind of pulling it forward. Children are on that, they can fall under the wheels of that. You can't see them. It's just overcrowding. And so we would see so many crush injuries and deaths in small children because of something like that. And it's just another level of destruction, and desperation, because you need some kind of transportation, and people are subjected to this, especially small children. We would see crush injuries in the skull. I mean, we had a child with brain matter out, because it was crushed under a donkey cart. So we'd see a lot of that. And then just general illness, as a result of also this destruction. So, kidney failure because of recurrent chronic diarrhea because of this water contamination. Chlorine and membranes, things to clean the water and purify, are not allowed. They are blocked by the Israeli military. The water that the children are drinking is very high in salt, coming from the sea, but they have no way to filter it. It's You need fuel for those, for those filters, and the fuel is blocked. Fuel is not allowed. So you would have little, very small children, like 9-month-old babies, coming in with kidney failure, and because they had chronic diarrhea, and they would just go back to their tents, consume this water again, come back in again, and eventually succumb to their, to this kidney failure and die. We had multiple kids like that.
I haven't talked about this in a while, about like the military dynamics behind like a campaign of genocide or ethnic cleansing, but the Gaza Strip reminds me of like a medieval siege, where you were not necessarily going to be able to kill everybody inside the fortress. You would just wait till exposure, lack of food, running water, and then eventually disease would
Oh yeah, that's
would get them. So
like the perfect definition of what's happening, right? You destroy it so bad that either people want to leave, and obviously they can't leave because they're blocked, but also make it so bad that it's uninhabitable, and they eventually succumb to all of the conditions there.
yeah. So if you look at most historical genocides in history, it's been a combination of mass internal displacement coupled with no medical facilities and lack of food, starvation. It all feeds into one thing, because realistically, when I first started arguing with people about this, they're like, if Israel wanted to, commit like a genocide, they would do it like tomorrow. It's like, no, they wouldn't. First of all, there's a lot of political reasons, and obviously they don't have the weapons or capability. And there's also another thing: troop morale. You can't have your actual troops do it. You need to have like a degree of separation between like this mass slaughter, which they are doing, but it's never going to take out everybody. So this campaign of bombing hospitals, of destroying sewage, water, electricity, medical safety, trash, and academics as well, is all part of that campaign of not just cleansing, but of complete erasure, which we've seen that before. So you just brought up a point. Um, what is the current state of medical infrastructure in Gaza? Like, are there like field hospitals going around? I know that there was concerns in the early days that like some nonprofit field hospitals could be like intelligence collection hubs for the Israeli military apparatus. Like how many functional hospitals are left? We were hearing like scattered reports that there were only like 3 trauma surgeons left in northern Gaza. I know you might not want to be too specific about all that, but whatever you could tell us would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, there is, that whole term like functioning hospital is a loose term. There is no hospital that exists there that functions at a normal capacity. Let's put it that way. There's not a single one. Even the highest functioning ones, which were like Nasser at the time that I was there, that was the highest, most services available, was if you brought that into the US, it would be like a dilapidated, terrible hospital that wouldn't even pass any safety, standards at all. There's nothing that actually constitutes a functioning hospital there. The field hospitals are not able to take care of the patients, the acuity of the patients that are coming in. And like I said before, the volume of the hospital at Nasser at the time that I was there was like 1,700 in the emergency department. That is an unheard of number. In the Bronx at St. Barnabas, I think it's like probably the busy ER that's in the US, and it's about like 400 on a really busy day. So just imagine what 1,700 is like. That is a magnitude that I can't even, as an emergency physician, I can't even imagine that. These are not patients that are like, just a little bit sick, like a cold and cough type of thing. These are patients coming in with severe injuries, life-threatening illness, and they're all like that. So to be able to sustain that load of and that volume it's impossible. And then not to mention you have imprisoned, killed, or they have somehow evacuated, all of the specialists and the professionals that were able to sustain that healthcare system. The Dr. Abu Safia, who is the head of pediatrics and basically started that from ground up at Kamal Adwan Hospital, is imprisoned without reason, abducted, abused, tortured. Now we're finding out, and held without reason. He should be at the forefront of rebuilding Gaza now, the healthcare system of Gaza, not behind, Israeli military in prison. That's what's happened. The highest trained physician there is basically a resident. And you're a doctor in training to make these life-changing decisions for people and to manage the cases with such high acuity that it's unheard of in any other healthcare system. And you can have a brick and mortar hospital, but until you have running water, clean water, electricity, fuel, medication, staff to run that hospital, it's useless. So the healthcare system is destroyed, and it's not back just because there was a ceasefire. That's what I want to point out for your viewers. We've heard the ceasefire agreement is implemented. That really, I speak to my colleagues on the ground there all the time. I speak to the local physicians there, and nothing has changed. Besides not having the air raids, the volume and the frequency of air raids and shootings, that's minimized obviously, and that's good. But the things that were promised are not coming in. The shelter was promised, that's not being allowed in. Fuel was promised, it's not being allowed in. Life-saving medications are not being allowed in that were once allowed, they're now being blocked. So things haven't changed. There's still equipment is lacking. So people get this sense that, well, there's a ceasefire, it should all be back. It's not. It's very far from it.
Yeah, and it's not just that. It's, things that are also medically adjacent, like mobile homes to protect people from exposure in the winter. They're not letting in like 60,000 mobile homes because they have metal components that Hamas can repurpose. It's like, get out of here, dude. There's an entire like scrap metal yard from leveling Gaza with plenty of metal to repurpose for that. So it's very transparent. And that brings me to the next question. And just like for a matter of record, I want to be able to circle back to this in like 5 years and show it to people. The massive propaganda talking point of Hamas being in hospitals, just from a tactical perspective, as an ex-military guy operating out of a place jam-packed with hundreds, if not thousands, of wounded civilians, is not the play. But what's your official experience with that?
So I was in Gaza twice. Like I said, for each time I was there for 4 weeks at a time. We lived inside of the hospital day and night. We worked like 24/7. We worked. We lived in the hospital. We had access to every part of the hospital. There were no parts that we were like, hey, don't go there, or whatever. We talked to everybody coming in and out of the hospital at all hours. Never did I or any other colleague of mine witness a militant, a combatant, weapons, any even injured soldier or someone with guns or something coming. Never. We treated 100% civilians, over 70% women and children. The men even that came in with their families. So that's just not how military operates, right? Or a combatant operates. That so this whole excuse and this rhetoric of, oh, we're bombing the hospital because that's where the combatants are, that's where the fighters are, it's absurd. We had access to every part of that hospital, and how come we didn't at least once treat an injured soldier, treat someone that was, had some kind of military, something to them that was military or fighter or anything. We talked to the locals there all the time, and we made it well known. We will treat anybody. We are not here to take sides. We will treat everybody. Never happened. We never even heard anybody talking about it. So, them using us as shields and this and that, it wasn't happening. It just didn't happen. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not military trained. I'm not a munitions expert. All I know is what I witnessed and what I didn't witness. And it was that there were no military or combatants or fighters inside that hospital. And aside from that, healthcare workers are targeted. They're targeted.
Mhm.
Hospitals are targeted. So why in the world would a fighter, if I was a fighter, why would I want to be where I'm a target? That's insane. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and it, since October 7th of 2023, it's been Israeli propaganda works to manufacture consent to do on a large scale with that which was forbidden to do or was unconscionable to do. So how it basically worked was the first time a hospital was struck, they said, no, it was a misfired Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket. But now we're going to and they got away with it. And now we're going to kind of flirt with like doing direct action raids into Al-Shifa Hospital because we have to go and get the tunnels. And I just want to remind everybody, just to put this on the same record, that I think this was November 11th. I'll have to fact check the date. They put out this CGI schematic of all the tunnels that existed under the command nexus of Hamas under Al-Shifa Hospital. Intelligence-based illustration video regarding Hamas's use of the Shifa Hospital both above and below ground. And if you're just listening to the audio, because I know most of you guys just listen to the audio, there's a massive unconnected tunnel network with no doors or any conjoining buildings. There's offices with no stairs or no walls or doors going into anywhere. And yeah, it's just completely fabricated nonsense. But yeah, so I saw the military layout, the SSE sensitive site exploitation, like the guns laid out. There's like 4 AK-47s that they found in Al Shifa Hospital, a couple of handguns. I was like, I don't know. I grew up with way more than that on my granddad's like ranch in Arkansas, so I don't know really what they're pointing, trying to score there. But obviously, it wasn't. If you're finding weapons caches at all where militants have been, you know what? Experienced insurgents don't do, leave their weapons behind. So just a lot of holes going through there. And I just wanted to say, like, in terms of like warfare, what you allow to happen and not happen is like really important because it sets a precedent. It's kind of like law in that way. So now we have set for modern warfare going forward the state policy of bombing hospitals. Have you considered like what Israel has done and what America has allowed it to do in this theater of operations? What impacts it will have on conflict medicine going forward throughout the world?
Yeah, and I've said this in other interviews. I mean, it's a dangerous precedence to set, right? And not just hospitals, but shooting children in the head or indiscriminately bombing where there's 50% population of children, dropping bunker buster bombs on tents where there's families and civilians living. All of those things are dangerous precedents. That, and Of, well, we're trying to spare civilian lives. This is just simply not true. It's not true. Because we saw it, we witnessed it. It's just not true. The numbers don't add up. That doesn't make any sense. You are not trying to spare civilian lives. There's indiscriminate bombing of this, and it's very dangerous to be able to say that healthcare workers don't have immunity in a conflict zone, because historically healthcare workers, humanitarian aid workers, we are kind of spared and protected, but it's exact opposite in Gaza. You are actually targeted. You are targeted going in, you are targeted when you are there, and you do not feel protected when you are there. I never felt protected when I was there. And it's this false sense of security that we have that, okay, well, they're not going to kill an American doctor. But
Yeah,
easily
totally not.
a friendly fire, or oh, it was an accident. So we never felt safe, and that's just a dangerous, very dangerous precedence to set, because it will, it will lead to future, a targeting of healthcare workers in other places and other conflicts.
Yeah. Journalists as well, anyone that can expose what's going on. You don't want the healthcare workers coming back to their home countries and telling the media about it. That's very inconvenient. But I think the most egregious precedent was how they directly did a 3-strike targeting of that World Central Kitchen convoy. And it was very intentional, because after that, the World Central Kitchen was like, we can't send people in there. And the Israeli military knew, from a political perspective, we only have to do it once, and then say like, oh, my bad, it was a complete failure of communication, even though they told them exactly their grid location, and they had military personnel from Canada, Britain, and the United States giving them grid locations about where their position was at all times. So yeah, there's terrible precedent with that. So moving on, you were featured in a Washington Post article published this morning. Medical evacuations slow amid uncertainty of right of return. Could you explain the process of medical evacuations from Gaza? And if you need to generalize it to conflict zones at large for security purposes, that would be totally great too.
No, and I think it's like WHO has put out, a kind of public, knowledge type of medical evacuations in general and how they work. And, I've kind of learned a lot more about medical evacuations and how they're working, but there's a lot of hiccups and issues with this whole process. And that was part of our, reason for our visit with the United Nations Secretary General Guterres. We had asked that there be a more streamlined pathway for medical evacuations, especially children. So there's about, at least 2,500 children. That's a very low number because it's only the ones that are on the list for urgent evacuations. But you need you basically, there's like an NGO that tries to find help outside of Gaza for a child. For example, in the hospital, there's a little girl that I'm trying to help with evacuation currently. Her name is Mira. She's a 4-year-old little girl that was shot in the head by a drone sniper, and she's one of the girls, the child that they referred to in the Washington Post this morning. Her mom was also injured, so she was approved in a hospital in the United States, and she was okay. We'll give her care. We can get her over here. Once we get her over here, we'll provide care. We'll find the funding for her. But her mom was then injured. Now her mom has a traumatic amputation, and so now is also a patient. She also has 2 little girls, 2 other little girls. Male companions are not allowed to evacuate. So her father wouldn't be allowed to evacuate. So who does that leave? So it puts families in this situation that is like unimaginable. As a mom of 3 small kids, if someone asked me to, leave one of my children in a war zone, in a terrible situation, I would never do it. So it puts you in a terrible situation where they are separating families, and it's because they don't get the security clearance. You've probably seen so many posts about like small children, like 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds being left behind because they weren't given the security clearance and they were the sole member of a family being left behind. How does a 4-year-old pose as a security risk? I don't understand that.
So
Um,
I assume an Israeli government affiliated organization writes the policy and approves the evacuations.
Well, that's the problem. There is nothing written. There is nothing official. It is all just clearly subjective. And there's never really a reason given, right? There's, if you're denied, and that goes for all of COGAT, there's really no reason given. It's all just a yes or no based on who's working that day. But the bigger problem is, finding hospitals in other countries to accept patients, and creating that pathway. One of the big asks and things that we're advocating for is allowing patients in Gaza to go to East Jerusalem and West Bank for care when the hospitals there have agreed to take them. But that medical corridor that allowing those patients to travel there is being blocked by obviously the Israeli military. So we're asking that that be opened up, because what that does is the cost, it's a lot more cost effective to keep patients closer to home, right? And it also allows them to return. And I know recently there was some news about people having to sign these waivers that basically say that they may not be guaranteed return. Could you imagine how terrifying that is as a parent to sign something like that, knowing your child is left behind? So these are the kind of predicaments that the people are being put through, and in my opinion, is complete hell.
So it's not just leaving a single child behind or family members behind. The girl that you were referencing, the one with the head wound, she would just get sent to America by herself or with like one companion of the family, and then what would happen? There's no right of return guaranteed at all.
Right. That's the issue that she's dealing with. She has the hospital, but now her mom needs care too. So where's her mom going to go? And adults aren't really allowed to evacuate for care. So it makes these situations. And then the mom got injured because of an airstrike. After her daughter is shot in the head. It's just it's a constant hell for people there, and and it's not going to get better because of these arbitrary rules.
Yeah, it's also like weaponized bureaucracy to the point of terrorism. That's kind of like what it seems to me, like hearing
Well,
this.
yeah, and weaponizing basic human rights like water and electricity and food. That's a constant theme for the last year.
So there was this idea, I don't take anything in terms of foreign policy of what President Trump says completely seriously. His plan to like clear out Gaza, and they're going to go to Jordan, going to go to Egypt. We've done a couple of episodes on this podcast and also on Mint Press News about why that is geopolitically infeasible, both for the Jordanian and Egyptian governments, as well as the Gulf states and so on. So, but the King of Jordan was just in Washington, D.C., at the White House, and he said just very unhappily that Jordan would take 2,000 cancer patients, child cancer patients. Don't know if that's ever going to happen, but like once they're in Jordan, they're going to be stuck in Jordan, hypothetically, if this happens, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a right to return, you're just going to a place, and there's no certainty you're going to be allowed to return. Um, yeah, I mean, and the issue with that is, whether there are 2,000, I think he said his quote wasn't exact, but I think he said cancer patients or medical illnesses in children. But even that, I mean, we need more countries like Jordan or Egypt to take patients. That's what we need. That's allowing more, that's like expanding the medical corridor for patients to go to other places, because even Egypt and Jordan have a limited amount of healthcare that they can provide. If you're putting an influx of thousands of patients in one country in one healthcare system, now you're overburdening that healthcare system. So what we need is more countries to step up, and specifically the U.S. and the European countries, to say that we're going to take patients too. And I think that there's a sense of stigma, of course, accepting patients from Gaza, unfortunately, even if they're children. That's what needs to stop. Is we need to be allowed to take patients, to different countries, and even their families, and allow them right to return. Because that's a lot of the hesitance of countries taking patients, is if you're bringing 2,000 people in and they have no right to return, they're going to be more hesitant in accepting those patients, obviously, for financial reasons.
Yeah, and of course, the new administration doesn't want anyone coming over. It's just breaking right now that the Trump administration is going to axe the Afghan resettlement office And yeah, there's this whole mania about immigrants and political refugees and asylum in Europe, especially like countries like Germany with rising nationalist, far right nationalist parties that are railing against immigrants, and like all the Syrians from the Syrian civil war that started in 2011. Yeah, it's just, I don't think Europe or America is going to be the pipeline, and
Yeah,
the Middle East
unfortunately.
isn't. So like this is the situation. I don't know, just kind of in terms of modern conflicts, in terms of medicine, I think it's completely unprecedented.
Oh yeah, I mean, but you're also tying the hands of the people there, right?
Mhm.
Just displacing them, kicking them out of that place, and then saying we're going to rebuild it is also not an option. You empower them, allow them to rebuild, give them the things that are needed, like the heavy, the machinery needed to clear the rubble. That's being blocked. If that was allowed, they were allowed to rebuild, remove the rubble, and then being allowed to give in shelter and all these things. Maybe there's a start there. Rebuild the electricity grid that you destroyed and the water systems that you destroyed. Allow that to come in. But when you're blocking half the things that are needed to rebuild and recover, how do you expect a population to come back? How do and other countries are not even taking these patients in. So what happens? What is the solution there? I'm not on, it's just kind of, it's just the elephant in the room.
Right. And of course they're trying to manufacture conditions that they could plausibly deny actually imposing, that says, oh, you want voluntary migration because this place is unlivable. Well, we'll be benevolent and facilitate it for you. So that's kind of like what we're looking at right now, unfortunately. So um, you're back in the United States. Is there any initiatives that you're working with that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing a lot of advocacy work with another group of doctors. A large group of us went to DC to kind of talk to congressmen, senators, senator staff. Showed our pictures, our experience, our what we witnessed, and asked certain deliverables. And then after that, the same week we went to United Nations to kind of advocate for medical evacuations as well as kind of reinstating UNRWA. And we spoke to the various nations there about contributing to UNRWA, and in the face of actually basically the U.S. withdrawing all the aid to it. But yeah, I mean, I think that as any other healthcare worker that's been to Gaza, I don't think that it leaves you. You leave a part of yourself, in fact, in Gaza, and you continue to advocate. And I know for myself, this is something I'm not going to stop doing until there's restoration of dignity for people there. I don't think that you can witness something like that and come back and be silent. At least not a decent person, anyway.
So what So in terms of advocacy, I know you were at the Capitol. I think I saw a video on social media of you with other doctors that I recognized from interviews on various media outlets. I generally when I go to the Capitol, I go with veterans, like Veterans for Peace and About Face and stuff like that. What was the response that you received from the people that you talked to?
I think it was, I mean, unfortunately, it wasn't. We didn't meet. I should speak for myself. I didn't meet with any senior staff. We met with mostly, either like just staff members, like interns or whatnot. But it was. I thought they would be completely surprised. Some were more receptive than others. But it was basically kind of a, yeah, well, it's kind of like a collateral damage type of thing. But also it's a very it's kind of like I said, it's an elephant in the room. I think they all know, but it's their hands are tied. They feel that their hands are tied, or you can't say something because of fear of being doxxed. And so, it was a. I don't know what else to say about it besides that. We did our best to advocate. We met with the people that were willing to meet with us, and yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry again, y'all. I'm having massive technical difficulties, so didn't hear what you last said. Could you repeat it one more time?
I said, yeah, I mean, I said, I think they met with us to check a box. And basically, there's a lot of things that they didn't want to say, but they knew were true. I showed them the picture of Mira, the little girl with the bullet in her head, when I first saw her and treated her. We got a CT scan and there was a bullet lodged in her head. And that's that picture kind of went viral. And I was showing them that this is what we saw. We saw children with bullets in their head and chest. And this was a normal thing. And I expected a lot of people to be surprised, but they weren't really surprised. I think that people know what's going on, but that there's a sense of fear that if they speak up, they'll be stigmatized or whatnot.
Yeah, I've talked to some former IDF soldiers, and they try to say, and again, I'll never apologize for the U.S. interventionism or the American empire, but what turned me into a public figure was kind of, I'd been an anti-war advocate for a long time, but that was like more of a private thing. I'd like show up. It was the comparison like of the U.S. military conduct in Iraq and Afghanistan, which was horrible. But I don't think there was this. Nothing that I saw was like on this scale of like institutional consent for massacres and shooting kids. Um, there are actually instances where we have an entire military prison at Fort Leavenworth where those people who just shoot 3 kids just to get the rocks off go forever. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, there are scandals like the Haditha massacre where no one got prosecuted, but it's just I've never seen something like this institutionalized. Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you bring up a really important theme, which is accountability, right?
Mhm.
Accountability has been completely just trampled over in this in this instance, and that's the scary part of it. Is that you can pretty much do anything you want, right? If you can just sanction the people who are saying this is wrong, then there's no more rules, and that's what's happening. Anyone who says this is illegal, you should be held accountable, you just sanction them. and and that's kind of what's been happening, and that's dangerous. And I don't you have a military background. I have zero military background. I have no politics involved in this, no religion involved in this. This is strictly about humanity. I'm a physician, I'm a mother. This is about humanity. If you can't agree, or you think it's controversial to say that you shouldn't shoot children in the head or the chest or indiscriminately bomb children or civilians, if that's controversial, then I don't know what else to say. I mean, there's nothing left after that. Humanity is dead if that's the case.
Well, I think the most disturbing thing. Well, first of all, you don't need a you don't need a military background to grasp the big picture. What's going on? Isn't working. The IDF did not defeat fighters inside of Gaza. They didn't, according to our own Office of Director of National Intelligence. They've like reconstituted their numbers comparable to October 7th because the IDF has created a whole new acronym: Wounded Child, No Surviving Family.
Yes, exactly. And that's very important, Greg, because you cannot bomb people into submission. You cannot bomb ideas out of people's heads, right? That is not how you come to a peaceful resolution. You cannot bomb someone to convince them that they don't deserve human rights or, just rights to live. No matter how much you bomb someone, you're never going to convince them that they don't deserve to live or that their children don't deserve to live. And so that's what the problem is you cannot defeat an idea. And this is an idea that they're trying to defeat. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I forget who said this quote. I mean, off the top of my head, was it Einstein? Was it out of Alcoholics Anonymous? But the definition of insanity, or at least one of them, is repeating the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So, didn't work in Vietnam, didn't work in Cambodia, didn't work in Iraq, didn't work in Afghanistan. But you know what? Maybe this time a massive bombing campaign will work. No, I,
Yeah.
I I guess you work with other medical staff, medical personnel inside America that have never been to Gaza. I have a friend who like used to work at Mount Sinai, and because of her advocacy, like she had like formal like HR complaints about speaking anything out about Israel. Like, how is the institutional hospital environment in the United States about this? At least where what you're exposed to about this quote unquote conflict.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible, right? There's a lot of people that have actually been fired for speaking up or saying anything. And I think that's, that's again, that's very scary because as physicians, as healthcare workers, we are supposed to protect humanity and human rights. And when you kind of only allow that for a subset of people, but not others, it's dangerous. And it's kind of hypocritical and cowardly to just bury your head in the sand. I know that a lot of us have asked our respective colleges to say stuff, to say something, make a statement. You've made it about Ukraine. Why can't you make it about Gaza? And we've been told repeatedly, like, we don't want to say anything political. And, unfortunately, yeah, we face a lot of polarization when we speak about it. I don't associate my workplace with my advocacy work for Gaza. I know that people have been passed up for promotions, have been discharged from their duties, from their roles in hospitals for saying things and being vocal. But and there's always that fine line. If you say a little too much or you say the right word, it's you never know. And so we are all putting ourselves at risk. Not just physicians, but all of us as professionals, we're putting ourselves at risk by being vocal, and not just career and political wise, but just our lives as well. I mean, I've received, though they may be empty threats, but I've received threats from people online and saying, "Watch your back," and you should have your license removed, and this and that. I mean, all sorts of terrible threats, and even my family. I mean, someone found my husband's LinkedIn profile, even though we don't have the same last names, and has started to target him. And it's scary. It's dangerous because it's not warranted, number one, but we're also not saying anything I'm not saying anything politically motivated. I'm strictly talking about children. I'm saying children, killing children is wrong. If that it calls for my, threats towards me, that's scary. That's dangerous. That can't be okay.
It's a pretty low bar to say, "Hey, children shouldn't be scared," and that makes you a radical. You know what?
Right.
You sound like a communist.
I mean, it's kind of funny. It's unfortunately.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I got my old address docs, the last four of my social and my driver's license. I don't know how they figured that out, but
Yeah.
yeah. But that
It's
that
out of
was that
control.
was that was at the beginning. I think in terms of like death threats that I'm personally getting, um, they've kind of died off. But then again, my female colleagues, it hasn't stopped for them
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
for obvious cultural and social reasons. But yeah, okay. So I guess the final question is, and again, thank you so much for coming on and taking time out of your day to do this. Where can we find you? And I know you have
Um,
a social media
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I share all of my interviews and my advocacy work on social media on Instagram. I actually didn't really use it before, but now I have had to learn a lot about Instagram. But yeah, it's at Dr. Mimi ER. So DrMimier, and you feel free to share that. But I have a lot of interviews I've done, a lot of work, and it's all about Gaza. I've been shadow banned as well, just like I'm sure you have.
Mhm.
For posting about it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to do, to be honest. I don't know what else to do but to speak up about it and just do as much advocacy work and amplify the voices from Gaza.
Yeah. All right. Well, that will be linked in the description. And again, thank you so much for coming on. I'm gonna let you get back to your day. We really appreciate it. And yeah, be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And that's it, y'all. Appreciate it for listening. This will go into the historical record, and I will be referencing this testimony uh, in the years to come going forward. And so I can say, I fucking told you so. So when everyone's like, it wasn't that bad. Look, I don't know what they're going to say. It's only Wednesday. I'm mentally exhausted. We'll probably, because I was having so many technical issues, release this on Thursday. So hope to see you then. We'll be doing a live Q&A on Thursday after I post this in the morning. So if you're on Patreon, check that out. And if you want to help the channel out and help us grow, you can go onto Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review and like some nice words so we can get all the liberals on Apple Podcasts to check out this show. And again, appreciate you all. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow and on Friday for our weekly comedic segment. All right. Cheers, y'all. Bye-bye.